Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Rent Prep for Landlords. I'm Andrew Schultz, Community Manager here at Rent Prep. I'm also a licensed real estate broker with over 14 years of experience in the property management and rental property industries. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. We're going to take a look at a few different lease clauses that are common in many leases, and then we're going to have ChatGPT improve our lease language so that we have a better overall lease when all is said and done. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get to it. So before we go any further, I do want to remind you that I'm not an attorney and ChatGPT still hasn't been to law school. So anytime that you're looking at making changes to your lease document or any legal document that you use in your business, I strongly recommend that you have those changes reviewed by a competent landlord-tenant attorney in your state that's familiar with the laws of your state and your municipality. ChatGPT literally has a disclaimer built into it telling you that it's not dispensing legal advice. And it's important that you recognize that that is the case. Your lease document is one of the most important documents that you have inside your business. It specifies what you're going to do and what you're going to deliver to the tenant, mainly a clean, safe, secure household. And it also outlines what the tenant is going to do for you, namely pay the rent on time and return the unit in good condition when they move out. Spend some time and money on your lease. Don't just trust it to the internet. Don't just download a form and run with it. Make sure that you spend the time to actually have an attorney review everything, especially if you're going to use language that's been generated by a third-party piece of artificial intelligence software. Things started with our first lease clause here. Before we do that, I do want to mention I'm in a fresh chat window here, and we're using ChatGPT 3.5. There is a version 4 available. It is $20 a month, and I was tempted to jump into the paid version, but for this video, I wanted to leave it on ChatGPT 3.5. just so everyone can see what's available in the free version in terms of being able to update lease clauses, update lease language, things of that nature. Before we jump any further, I do want to reiterate the point that I had just mentioned in the previous segment in talking about the dispensing of legal advice. Can you provide legal advice? And that's going to give us some sort of a disclaimer here. I can provide general information and explanations about legal topics, but I am not a lawyer and I cannot provide specific legal advice. Please do yourself a favor. If you're going to go through the process of using ChatGPT to generate lease language or update your lease language, or even if you're just downloading a lease from the internet, don't just take that lease as being 100% accurate for your state, for your municipality, for your market. Spend a little bit of money, have an attorney review it, and make sure that you're using a good quality lease and that all of your legal documents are good quality before you start issuing that stuff out. Because once it's signed, you're stuck with the terms of it, whether you really agreed to it or not. So all that being said, we're going to go ahead and start another chat window here. And I want to talk a little bit about engineering a prompt. Anytime you hear prompt engineering or you see a job description for artificial intelligence prompt engineer or anything along those lines, essentially what they're talking about is the input that you're giving the software to try to maximize the value of the output provided. So in this instance, we're going to provide ChatGPT with some context as to what we're doing and what help we're looking for ChatGPT to provide. So in this instance, we're going to say, pretend that you are a landlord and that you are updating your lease documents. Your goal is to protect the property as well as yourself. And I will provide lease clauses from a current lease. I will need your help in updating the clauses. Actually, I'm going to change that. I will need your help in improving the clauses. We'll hit enter. And ChatGPT basically just says, okay, I understand the context of what we're trying to do here. And essentially what we're doing is we're providing ChatGPT with that little bit of context that it needs to be able to understand what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and where it kind of falls into place. The better you get at asking questions or the phraseology behind these questions that you're asking, the better the responses are that you're ultimately going to get. So we're going to start here. I'm going to go ahead and grab a copy of my quiet enjoyment lease clause. And these are all lease clauses that came directly out of the lease that we use over at Own Buffalo. This is the lease clause as it's written right now today as of the time of recording, and today is September 1st, 2023. So what you're seeing is language that's coming directly out of our lease, and this is kind of an exercise to see whether or not the language that ChatGPT provides is better or worse than the language that we're currently using. So we're going to start with our quiet enjoyment clause. Please provide, let's see, updated and improved language for the following lease clause. And just go ahead and paste that in, and we'll hit enter. So my quiet enjoyment clause is pretty straightforward. It's only a couple sentences, and it basically states that as long as the tenant is paying the rent on time, they're entitled to quiet enjoyment of their apartment, and that they also understand that the other tenants in the building are entitled to quiet enjoyment of their units as well. So ChatGPT gave a little bit of an update here. Landlord guarantees that provided the tenant fulfills their rental obligations and complies with the terms of the lease, tenant shall enjoy undisturbed, peaceful possession of the premises throughout the lease term. Tenant acknowledges that all other residents are entitled to the same. This didn't really add much. Let's go ahead and hit regenerate and see what it gives us for another try. Landlord acknowledges and agrees that provided the tenant fulfills all obligations, et cetera, et cetera. See, I'm not getting what I want here. So that means that we need to change up the prompt a little bit. Please provide me with a lease clause for quiet enjoyment of a property. All right, so we'll have it write a clause from scratch and see what it provides. And it looks as though it provided something that's more or less the same as what I have in my lease currently. So not every single one of these is going to be an absolute slam dunk. Sometimes you get very, very good results, and sometimes you realize that the clause that you have probably works just fine. In this instance, ChatGPT is not really adding anything into this clause, and this is a pretty simple lease clause to begin with. So we're going to jump into something a little bit more complicated and see how it does with that. Let us jump into this clause that we have with regards to joint and several responsibility. Get this copied over here and copy. We'll come back over here and please provide updated and improved lease language from the following lease clause. Joint and several responsibility. Each tenant is jointly and severally liable for all lease obligations. If you or any guest or occupant violates the lease or rules, all tenants are considered to have violated the lease. Landlord requests and notices to any tenant constitute notices to all tenants and occupants. Notices and requests from any tenant or occupant, including lease termination, repair requests, and entry, constitute notice from all tenants, and in the event of an eviction suit, each tenant is considered the agent of all other tenants. So we asked ChatGPT to give us a little bit of an update on this language and see what it comes back with. And we're going to take a quick look here and see what it has to say. And as I'm reading through things here, it looks to me as though ChatGPT did a pretty good job of clarifying this language. It doesn't look to me as though it really added a whole lot into this one either. This means that each tenant is responsible for filling the terms of the lease. That seems pretty straightforward. I'm pretty happy with how that one came out. This is not necessarily something that I would use in my lease. I think I would probably keep the joint and several responsibility clause that I already have in this particular instance, just because this one's a little bit more wordy and doesn't necessarily add anything. But let's go ahead and generate another one just to see what it comes back with. And let's see. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned, we can actually flip back and forth between the different responses that it has generated as well. So if you hit that regenerate button down at the bottom, it does not delete the old one. You still have access to that. You just have a second one or a third one or however many you can sit and look through to see what makes the most sense for you. The other nice thing is you can obviously sit and pick and choose different pieces of the clauses as you're going through them. So for instance, maybe you really like this first paragraph here where it talks about each tenant being responsible jointly, collectively and individually, and jointly and severally liable for all obligations under the lease term. And then maybe you like the last paragraph of the second one. There's nothing that's stopping you from taking and picking and choosing the things that you pull out of ChatGPT to ultimately help you develop the lease clauses that you are looking for. Now, the next thing we're going to do is ask ChatGPT to generate a new lease clause, and then we're going to provide it with our current lease clause and ask it to combine the two. So we're going to use our smoking and vaping lease clause. So we're going to come in here, please generate a new lease clause preventing smoking or vaping inside the property. Okay, and it gives us a pretty straightforward, basic, no smoking, no vaping policy. The interesting thing is when you start giving it language to compare with. So for instance, we're going to pop my no smoking and no vaping lease clause in here, and we're going to go ahead and say, please combine your smoking, no smoking, and vaping clause with mine. And then we'll copy and paste our clause in, and we'll see what it comes back with. So for instance, the one thing that I wanted to see if it would pick out here was the additional cleaning fee. So in my clause, we have written smoking, vaping, incense, and candle burning result in buildup, and an additional cleaning fee of $250 per room may be assessed if landlord determines that the tenant has been smoking, vaping, burning incense, or burning candles. And that was obviously missing from the one that ChatGPT had generated because ChatGPT didn't know that we charged that fee. So when it combined the two, it came down here at the very, very bottom, and it did include my $250 per room cleaning fee assessment in the event that we need to go in and clean an apartment that has been smoked in or has had a bunch of candles burned in it or whatever the case may be. So that's where things can get very, very powerful using ChatGPT. You can have it generate a new document a new lease clause, then have it compare your lease clause with the one that it just generated and combine the two such that it gives you, if you will, a more powerful lease clause than what you started with. And that's a super, super useful feature, especially when you know that you need to say more, but you're not necessarily sure how to say it. ChatGPT is a good resource to use in situations like that. Another thing that you can use ChatGPT for is asking it questions, polling it for responses. For instance, the next clause that we're going to look at is talking about glass break. Who's responsible for glass when it gets broken during a tenancy? So you can actually ask ChatGPT, who is typically responsible for glass breakage during a tenancy? And let's see what it responds. Let's see. And it actually gives us a little bit of information here, which is kind of useful. So some common scenarios: tenant negligence or intentional act. If the glass is broken as a result of something the tenant did, either negligently or intentionally, it's typically the responsibility of the tenant to pay for it. Normal wear and tear. If the glass break is due to normal wear and tear, such as a property aging over time, we've had old wood windows where they're single pane. We've had like pieces of glass just randomly crack when you're opening and closing just from shifting, things of that nature. That's something that would probably fall back to the landlord. Specific lease terms. It actually highlights the fact that leases can vary, and some have very specific provisions on who's responsible for glass breakage. And what we want to do here is basically take this and say, okay, we know that the tenant is typically going to be the one that's responsible for glass breakage unless it's caused by the landlord or the landlord's agent. So what we'll do is copy our glass break clause in here using the context of the previous response. Please update my lease clause. And ChatGPT spits out a response. And essentially what it does is it takes our existing language from our previous input, combines it up again up here with the information that it provided in its first response, and ultimately it generates a lease clause that is a little bit stronger than what it otherwise could have been. Tenant acknowledges and agrees that any broken glass within the premises shall be the responsibility of the tenant to repair or replace, unless the breakage is directly caused by landlord or landlord's agent. Tenant's responsible for promptly addressing and rectifying any glass breakage that occurs during the tenancy. Landlord will be responsible for repairing or replacing any glass that is damaged as a result of landlord's actions or negligence. So see, this is a situation where landlord's actions or negligence should probably say landlord or landlord's agent's actions or negligence. So that's something that when you have an attorney actually go through and do the physical review of the document, they're liable to catch something like that, whereas ChatGPT does not necessarily catch something like that. So that's good. I was hoping to see one of those pop up here as we were working our way through these lease clauses, and that's a really good example of it. That's one of those things that if it's landlord's actions or negligence versus landlord's agent's actions or negligence, that could have an impact down the road. Obviously, we're talking about glass break here, so it's probably not a massive situation, but it could be a much larger situation depending on whose actions or whose negligence is responsible and what the cost of the damage or what the cost of the negligence truly was. So that's worth noting as well. The last lease clause that I want to look at here is basically our condition at time of move-in lease clause. And essentially, we have a lot of concerns with tenants once they move out coming back to us and complaining about security deposit deductions, typically for either cleaning or for tenant-caused damages. So what we're going to do is provide ChatGPT with some context as well as our lease clause, and then see what it can do to help give us a little bit better lease clause ultimately that we can use in our lease when it comes to tenants agreeing to the condition of the apartment at the time that they moved in. So we'll go ahead and provide that same context to ChatGPT. We're having a lot of issues with tenants complaining about security deposit deductions after move out. These are mostly as a result of cleaning and tenant-caused damages. Can you help me improve my lease clause about the condition of the home at the time of move in? We'll go up here and we'll fix our spelling mistakes. And let's just go ahead and hit enter before we provide it with the context of our clause. We'll see what it gives. And actually, I already really like this because it's breaking the entire move-in condition and security deposit process out a little bit, actually. Talks about move-in inspection, talks about maintenance and care, talks about cleaning and repairs. Upon move-out, tenant shall return the premises in the same condition. It talks about security deposit deductions, and it talks about how to go about actually resolving a dispute in the event that a tenant is not happy with the deduction list that they get from their security deposit. So let's go ahead and copy our lease clause, and we'll give ChatGPT the prompt. Here is our lease clause on condition of premises. Please update it using the language from your previous response. Okay, and what it did was basically took our lease clause and went through and updated it using the context of what it provided with us or provided to us in the previous response. It's worth noting that it mentions the report of defects within 10 days of discovery, and that is actually a little bit incorrect. It took that out of context. It should be 10 days of taking possession of the apartment. And essentially what that means is when someone moves into one of our units, we give them a 10-day period after they move in to report any sort of additional damages or anything like that that may not have been noticed during their move-in condition report. And we go ahead and add that into their report so that they're not necessarily charged for those damages at the time that they move out. The nice thing is we have context at that point because we have their move-in condition report as well as photos. So typically if someone were to, say, damage a wall when they were moving things into the apartment, they would not be able to turn around and claim, well, that was like that when we moved in. No, it wasn't. We took a picture 2 days ago and it didn't look like that. This was obviously caused by you. So again, this is why you have to make sure that whatever ChatGPT is providing for a response, you have to go through and verify that everything that it gives you is correct and legal and makes sense for your market and in your lease. You can't just copy and paste something blindly and hope that it's going to work out for you. Now, there's more that you can do with ChatGPT when we're talking about lease clauses. For instance, what are the most commonly forgotten lease clauses is a good question to ask ChatGPT, because ChatGPT does have access to all of the knowledge that's out there on the internet. So it can sit and go through and recognize that these are the most commonly missed lease clauses, or these are the lease clauses that tend to be underlooked and underdeveloped when you're generating your lease, such that you may have a situation if you don't have one of these, or if your lease clause is perhaps incomplete just due to the fact that it's not strong enough. So let's see, what did it give us for potential lease clauses that are commonly forgotten? Utilities and services. This is one that I see all the time. The number of leases that I come across that don't have a list of who's responsible for paying what utility is insane to me. And actually, lawn and landscaping and snow removal is another one. It's not on this list, it doesn't look like, but that's one that pops up all the time as well. Let's see. Early termination includes conditions and penalties for earlier termination of the lease, whether initiated by the tenant or the landlord. So let's see if it'll give us a sample clause for an early termination. Please provide additional context on point 12 from, let's just say from point 12 above. Let's see if it's smart enough to find its own response, find point 12, and talk about, point 11, early termination. There you go. It's popping out some language that you can use with regards to early termination. So if you don't have an early termination clause in your lease, again, this is something that's starting to become more and more and more common as time goes on. Having a piece of language in your lease that deals with lease termination and how to get out of a lease early is a good idea. It's generally speaking a good idea to make sure that you're covering all the eventualities that you may find yourself in when it comes to operating a lease. And having a tenant that needs to move out early is certainly a pretty common occurrence. So having some sort of an early termination policy is a good idea. Having that written into your lease is an even better idea, because then everybody knows what to expect in the event that that tenant needs to move out early for some reason. So that's actually really good. I'm glad that it was able to take that early termination clause and kind of build it out, not even into just a lease clause, but almost to a full-on policy. You can actually take this and develop it a little bit further into a policy as to when a tenant contacts us looking for early termination of their lease, these are the steps that we need to follow. And ChatGPT can certainly help with something like that. Even what we have here with this early termination lease clause is a good start, and this could easily be turned into a full-on policy or procedure document without too much trouble. So it's definitely worth asking ChatGPT questions if you're not sure of something, or if you're trying to find information, or just trying to make sure you cover all your bases. It's a really, really good way of doing that. The other nice thing that I have found ChatGPT is good at is helping to word something if you're not exactly sure how to go about wording it. So for instance, we used it recently, and unfortunately I can't share the language because it's part of an active property management agreement. But we had a property management agreement recently that we had to do some lease language updates, some property management agreement language updates. And there was something that one client in particular needed written into their agreement, and we were struggling to word it the way that we wanted to. And essentially what we did was went to GPT and gave it some half-baked language and said, can you make this work? Can you make this, using the context provided, can you help us generate this property management language? And essentially it gave us a couple of different paragraphs to look at. And from there, we were able to kind of pick and choose the sentences that made the most sense. We then took that and ran it back through the ChatGPT engine again and had it beef up that language. And ultimately it came out with a version of the language that was pretty close to what we were looking for. From there, we did send it on to our attorney to make sure that they were all right with it. And obviously they were. And then obviously we discussed it with the client when all was said and done, and they were good with the language as well. So there are a lot of opportunities to use ChatGPT when you're talking about working in the context of leases, when you're talking about working in the context of a property management agreement, when you're talking about working in the context of a legal document. There are a lot of places where ChatGPT can and will benefit you as long as you spend the time to go through and make sure that the information that you're getting from ChatGPT is actually worthwhile and valid and not just garbage that can't be used in your market. Using AI in your business to help you improve your documents, your policies, and your procedures is really a no-brainer at this point. The technology is becoming easier and easier to use, more and more accessible, and easier to understand every single day. If you haven't at least started scratching the surface of what AI is capable of, I would strongly encourage you to give it a shot, even if you don't ultimately wind up using AI in your business. I think you're going to be shocked at what its capabilities are now, and really shocked at where its capabilities are going to be going in the future. So there you have it. We don't have robot lawyers yet, but who knows where this technology is going and ultimately what it's going to be capable of. Are you using ChatGPT or any other AI technology in your business yet? Drop us a comment down below and let us know what your particular use cases are. We're always interested to see how people are using AI technology in their business and how it's making their lives a little bit easier. Do us a favor, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Andrew Schultz with rentprep.com, and we'll talk to you soon.